Just One Story is sponsored by the Tenacious Change Approach. The Tenacious Change Approach creates positive organizational and community change that resists snapping back to the way things were before. The Tenacious Change Approach is all about relationships, always about relationships, and the process of change is the work. To learn more about the Tenacious Change Approach, visit tenaciouschange.us and click on the Changing Organizations and Communities link. This is Just One Story. My name is Tom Klaus. Just One Story features stories of personal leadership, or what some might call personal sense-making. Now, I must confess to a bias. I know there are many stories in each of our lives that any of us could tell. However, I believe there really is just one story we each have that carries the essence of who we are. It may be the story we have told 1,000 times to 1,000 different people. It may be the story that we have never told anyone except ourselves 1,000 times over. It may be the story that only comes to us at night in those moments when we are sorting our true self from the other selves we are forced to play in the light of day. The stories of personal sense-making featured in this podcast are told in the voices of the people who have experienced them. They are real people telling their own stories of personal leadership. When I decided to start the Just One Story podcast, I sent a mass email invitation to people on my mailing list. I didn't know if anyone would be interested in sharing their story. I was ready to accept there would be no responses. I did receive several responses, though. The very first person I heard from began her email with this line: "The nub of my story is that I was conceived before the baby that was conceived before me would have been born. I owe my life to my teen mother's decision to terminate her pregnancy." I really wanted to know more. Don't you?
My name is Cynthia Flynn. I am a certified nurse midwife and a sociologist. I like to say I was born on the darkest day of the year, and then it got better after that. Well, I grew up in what I now know to be a very poor family, in a very poor neighborhood. I didn't, of course, know as a child. And no one in my family had been to college. In fact, no one in my neighborhood, no one in my entire grade school had ever been to college. And I was really pushed as a child to achieve academically. I did really well in high school, almost all straight A's, and well on the SAT, and was invited to go to lots of colleges. But I chose to go to Reed College in Portland on scholarship and work study. And when I got there at the ripe old age of 17, I was in way over my head. These were kids from the Bronx School of Science and prep schools, and they traveled to Europe, and they had visited museums all over the world, and their parents were highly educated, and then socially, I was also kind of a fish out of water. I had been raised very fundamentalist Christian. My father was the choir director and an elder. My mother was the organist. You know, these were just a completely different kind of people than I had ever met. And so it was really tough. It was all complicated by the fact that my parents were really pressuring me to the point where I was crying like about every day to break up with my boyfriend because they said he wasn't good enough for me. Of course, his father was a physician, and he did not live in a house that was 780 square feet with 8 people like I did. But he wasn't good enough for me. And so eventually I caved and broke up with him. And all of this combined so that by the second semester of my sophomore year, I was like 19, I dropped out of school. But I couldn't go home. I didn't fit in that house anymore. I mean, those other 7 people had taken over my space, and my grandmother had an empty room in the men's boarding house that she ran 2 blocks from the University of Washington. So she said I could have that. So I did. I moved in on a Sunday. By Thursday night, the guys and I decided we were having a party after she went to sleep. And we each brought a bottle of booze. I can't remember how I got it at age 19. But anyway, we had all kinds of booze. And we were being pretty quiet. But we drank a lot. And it got later and later. And we were getting tired and drunk. And finally somebody said they had ROTC in the morning, had to leave. And the party kind of broke up. But I ended up on top of a bed in the room of one of the young men. And so was he. And we weren't doing anything. We're just passed out, basically. And the next thing I remember, somebody said, she's coming up the stairs. And I made a beeline for my room where somebody had very conveniently left the practically empty bottle of vodka I had brought to the party propped neatly on my pillow, and my grandmother saw me making the mad dash to my room and walked into the room and saw the bottle of booze. She was not pleased, mildly. So the next morning, she threw out the kid whose room I was in, and his brother was downstairs. And that night, my mom and dad came to have this big powwow, and I was sent to my room, and the adults were downstairs discussing what they were going to do with me. Pretty soon, my mother came upstairs, and it's hard to really understand exactly why she did what she did, but she was trying to be a friend to me more than a mother, and trying to tell me that she wasn't perfect either, that she had made a lot of mistakes, and I was no worse than she was, and we were good people. But in the process, she told me a lot of things that you really should not tell your child. But among other things, she told, and I knew she had been a teen parent, that she had, that I had been conceived when she was in high school with my father, and that they had gotten married, and in fact were married for 64 years before he died, and that she had finished high school a semester early because she was smart. She was straight A student too, and I was born in December. And so I had known that much before. But the other thing that she told me was that I was not her first pregnancy. And I was just shocked to find this out. She said that when she had gotten pregnant the first time, again with my father, that my grandfather had come to her and given her $300, which was a lot of money in those days. This was in the Second World War, to get an abortion. And my mother's oldest sister, who was about 11 years older than her, was a nurse, and she could arrange for basically a safe abortion. And my mother did it. She did have an abortion. And to her dying day, she said she was absolutely clear that she did not have any problems with that abortion, that she had no medical problems, no emotional problems. It was fine. It didn't really affect her. It was, a very straightforward procedure, and it was done, and that was that. And she never changed her mind about that. Even though my younger sister was very anti-abortion and demonstrated and lobbied and all sorts of things, my mother just, no, it was the right, it's what I wanted to do at the time, and it was fine. But what she told me that night was that that child would have been born after I was conceived. If she had not had that abortion, I would not be here in this form, because she would have still been pregnant with that child at the time I was, in fact, conceived. I owed my very existence to the death of another child. And she also told me that when she got pregnant with me, my grandfather came back and put $300 on the table and, asked her to abort me. And she said no, she wasn't going to do that. And I was never able to get out of her, why not? She couldn't really say, but she was just as clear that she was not going to abort me as she was clear that she was going to abort the other child. And she was totally okay with both of those decisions. I had a lot of survivor guilt. Why am I here and that other child is not? What am I here for? I mean, why is it that, she didn't abort me also? In fact, later on in life, I asked her to write the story of my birth. And I'm going to take a minute and read to you what she wrote to me. On my first visit to Dr. Parsley, whose name I got off the directory in a medical building, he said, "Don't worry about delivery, you won't feel a thing." He was sort of wrong. I had an afternoon appointment on the 21st. My mom went with me on the bus because your dad was home with pneumonia. The induction at the office was a shot and breaking of the water. I think the shot was something called Petruitin. I must have been dilated some because he had no trouble getting the forceps in to break the water. I immediately went into labor, took a taxi to the hospital, went through all the admission garbage, including paying the bill, went to a labor room, was joined by the nurse from the doctor's office, who rubbed my back, spoke soothingly, timed my contractions, asked if I felt like pushing, and gave me another shot. It was some kind of sedative followed by general anesthesia for the delivery. You were born at 7:25 p.m., 4.5 hours before the doctor expected, and I slept through the whole thing. My mom said, I woke up, said, "Is that all there is to it?" and vowed to have a bunch more, which she did. She had 5 more children. I looked at you and couldn't believe that baby had escaped my body, and I was still all in one piece. It was an easy pregnancy after 6 weeks of upchucking. I was young, healthy, and happy, received lots of support, and had some gorgeous maternity clothes. One dress was a hot pink crepe wraparound with draping just so, and I couldn't wait to get pregnant again so I could wear it again. I was sort of scrawny in those days and always looked better pregnant with a rosy glow and a little meat on my bones. Producing babies was intensely gratifying and the first real success of my life. I mean, this is a woman who had straight A's, was model beautiful, and was an accomplished pianist who played for the senior orchestra and the senior choir. But having a baby was the first real success in her life. And, she loved being a mom and being pregnant and raising kids. I really had a case of survivor guilt on top of this push to achieve. And, the combination was kind of amazing. And I did achieve a lot of things. Still, I had this underlying guilt about being alive and wondering what I was supposed to be doing with my life. Why am I really here? And I developed a mantra, which I still say, which is, there is a purpose for my life. I'm just not in on it.
As Cynthia said, she did achieve a lot of things after this experience. She returned to school, but to the University of Washington, where she earned her undergraduate degree in sociology. At the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, she added an MA and PhD in sociology. A Google Scholar search uncovers a trove of research articles she authored on subjects such as the effects of the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant accident on the local population and the migration patterns of the elderly in the United States. She won large research grants and taught in universities. Clearly, she established a solid career as a research scientist. Cynthia could not imagine what would come next.
And, then I heard about a program at Yale, which I couldn't hardly believe was true when I first heard about it, that with only a bachelor's degree in any subject and no prerequisites, you could go for 3 years to Yale University and become a registered nurse, get a master's in nursing, and become a certified nurse midwife. And I couldn't believe that that was true, but I called them the next day and it was. And I did get into that program and ended up quitting my job and getting in my car and driving there at age 47 and doing it and starting practice here in Eastern Washington at age 50. One of the things that happened when I was at school happened in the spring. And this was a very intensive program. I was studying really hard. I was living in the medical students residence hall across the street from the hospital and a block from the nursing school. My world was very small. And the window over my desk overlooked kind of like a quad area. And I was looking out the window and, I'm a scientist, but I had kind of like a vision or visitation, I don't know how to describe it, from that child that preceded me. And it said it was a girl, that she was my sister, my other sister. I have one other sister. And she just wanted me to know that she was really happy, especially since she had this great job. And her job was in the spring to go around to the trees that were, barren and start the leaves growing. And that when I saw the trees turning that funny lime green color before they turn into the color of the leaves that they're going to have, that was her, and that's what she was doing. And it was just a great job. She got to go everywhere and get these trees painted lime green and starting their leaves for the summer. And still kind of choked up, but and that when I saw that every year, that I should think of her. And it was just kind of like overwhelming. And, the scientist part of me could say, well, what a convenient delusion, because I had this, when this was over, I took a deep breath and exhaled in a way I never had. I just came to some kind of peace about that whole survival guilt kind of thing. And I don't know, it was a big comfort to me to feel like she was okay and happy. So every spring, when I see the trees just barely starting to turn that funny shade of lime green, I think of that little girl. About, 6 years after this visitation from that little child, my only sister contracted multiple myeloma. And it's commonly a disease of old age, and when old men get it, for example, they might live, it's almost like a chronic disease. They live 10 or 15 years and then often die of something else. But when a premenopausal woman gets it, it's a very different disease. And by then I was a medical person, so I could get access to data the general public couldn't. And I looked it up, and, her chances of living 6 months was something like 1 in 10,000. although her doctor was saying this is treatable, not terminal, which is just not true. And it's really a horrible disease in that form because it's cancer of the bone marrow and basically causes your bones to break from the inside out. It's very painful. It's a horrible disease. And she suffered tremendous. And she did make it 6 months and 3 days after diagnosis, but yeah, it was really tough. But she was an amazing woman. I mean, if there is a heaven, she's going to it. And so it was a huge loss to me. I have 4 fabulous brothers, but, she was my only living sister, and I still miss her. And I consulted with her professionally. She's a clinical psychologist, also with a PhD. But it was a big loss. Parents are supposed to like all their kids the same. They don't. My younger sister was the favorite of the 6 of us. And I was the least favorite and the scapegoat. And I felt that from a young age. And, later I checked with my sister, the psychologist, and she said, oh yeah, you're right. Behind your back, they say all sorts of rude things about you. And on the one hand, they were proud of me. On the other hand, I wasn't the right kind of born-again Christian. I did all sorts of behaviors that some they didn't know about, but a lot they did that they didn't approve of. Even going to read. I should have gone to a Christian school. It was the antithesis of a Christian school. I was always doing things that they didn't agree with or approve of. And when my sister died, I had a resurgence of that survivor guilt because, it should have been me that died, not my sister. But I got over that pretty fast, partly because of that initial visitation. Several months later, and she was always around. I just felt her presence. But one time she came to me and she says, oh, you're never going to believe this. This is such a riot. I found our sister, and guess what? I'm her new assistant. So she says, I'm going around helping her out, painting these trees lime green. It's really fun. We're having, they're laughing and joking and having a good time together. And I was like, whoa.
This is the reason I love to hear the one story of a person's life. I never know what new thing I'm going to hear and discover about the person. Each of us have just one story, and no one can stand in judgment of it. No other person can question its accuracy, its veracity, or its sincerity. It is between us and any higher power we embrace, if we embrace one at all. It is our story. It is the narrative that allows us to find meaning, purpose, hope, and the motivation to wake up and keep going each day. Sometimes it also answers the question of what happens after all of this comes to an end. I had to ask Cynthia, so what do you think you're going to be doing when you pass from this life?
I think I'm going to go find them and start painting some trees. And it's that time of year, the trees in my yard are still barren except for one that's barely starting to get that green color on it. And and so that's my story. I still have all of these sort of achievement goals and that I can't seem to kick, but I do the Buddhist thing more now and try to be more, concentrate more on being than doing, but I don't have the same survivor guilt that I did. I still don't know for sure what all I'm doing on this planet, but I'm okay with that now in a way that I wasn't when I was younger.
In just one story of Cynthia's life journey, she has found her first sister, reconnected with her second sister, and, through nursing and midwifery, has found some clarity in the purpose of her life. Thank you for listening to this first ever episode of Just One Story. A very special thank you to Cynthia Flynn for being willing to go first and share her story in this podcast. If you would like to share just one story in a future podcast, email justonestory@tenaciouschange.us. That is JUST, the number 1, STORY @tenaciouschange.us. Also, thanks to Willie K for his original music for Just One Story. Just One Story is sponsored by the Tenacious Change approach. Tenacious Change is positive change, driven by the power of relationships that resist snapping back to the way things were before. To learn more about the Tenacious Change approach, visit tenaciouschange.us or call 240-319-8525. Change forward with the Tenacious Change approach. My name is Tom Klaus, and I am your host for Just One Story. I am also its writer, producer, and editor. This podcast is a production of Tenacious Change, LLC. I hope you will join us for the next episode of Just One Story.